Oh, and thank you all so much for joining us today as we continue our conversation around the recently announced American Heart Association AI Assessment Lab powered by Dandelion Health. For those of you who missed it last month, we held a roundtable discussion with many experts in the field talking about the need for an independent third party to assess AI algorithms. We heard many perspectives on why this is important, from identifying and creating practical and efficient ways for healthcare systems to access AI tools. Today's conversation is a continuation of that, but instead of just ideas, today we're going to be talking about real examples from AI developers who are already making use of the assessment lab reports. Today, you'll not only hear from me, but also Nick Gosen from Dandelion Health, along with Moin Husani from Accucardia and Michael Pincina from Duke University. We're so grateful to welcome them today as early adopters of the assessment report. We have learned so much from these experiences and are thrilled to share those with you today. Here's the obligatory quick preview of our time. I'll spend just a few more minutes reminding everyone of the assessment lab's background and purpose, and then we'll dive right into the several products and services derived from the lab, along with the real-world case studies. We should have plenty of time for questions at the end, so please feel free to put those in the Q&A button at the bottom here as they come up for you. And if we don't have time, of course, we'll follow up after today's discussion. So let's dive right in. The development of the AI assessment lab is truly founded through the identification of this unmet need and how are AI algorithms going to be assessed, especially by those who do not have expansive resources to do so themselves. The large academic centers have really taken the lead with implementing these tools because they have the resources to assess them themselves. And while that's wonderful, it's really going to create a larger digital divide for those who don't have the ability to assess themselves. And we need to come up with a way for folks to have a budget-friendly way to assess AI tools. Through this identification and countless meetings, evaluations with experts, and identifying key partners, the American Heart Association AI Assessment Lab came to life. The original idea was centered around the creation of a fundamental need for a standard assessment report for cardiovascular algorithms, but we quickly realized that there's other derivative products and services that can help you close the gap. Today, we'll discuss these four key products with you all and see examples of how two have been implemented. It's worth mentioning that while what we provide today is a true independent third-party assessment, it's not a formal endorsement or certification. I also want to take a moment to recognize our expert AI advisory panel. As you'll see here, we have some of the key voices in the field leading the design and development of the assessment lab. They continue to provide incredible direction and oversight of the assessment products and services, and we're so thankful to them for their volunteer efforts. Finally, I want to highlight our collaboration with Dandelion Health to bring the lab to life. In a minute here, Nick is going to give us more insight into Dandelion's expansive and diverse health data system, which is critical to ensuring that the algorithms are tested against real-world data to truly put algorithms to the test. This, combined with their years of experience working in AI evaluation, has made them the ideal connection for the American Heart Association. And with that, I'll hand it off to Nick to tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today. It's a great turnout, and I am thrilled to see everyone here. So let me start off by telling you a little bit more about the data that drives the AI assessment lab. So Dandelion has built a consortium of currently 4 large health systems based in the United States, the 4 that you see here. Collectively, these add up to 73 hospitals and about 15 million patients. What these systems all share in common is a few things. First of all, they're all integrated delivery networks, so they all have a primary, secondary, and tertiary care footprint. What this allows us to do is really get the full continuum of care, which is particularly critical for cardiology, which is often diagnosed and treated in primary and secondary care settings. In addition, all of these health systems are regionally dominant in particular geographies, and they have, for various reasons, really good keepage of patients within their health system. What this allows us to do is have really good longitudinality of the data, which enables us to support use cases like risk stratification and prognostic algorithms, where that continuity over long time periods is important. And finally, as you can tell from where they're situated on the map, we've very carefully selected these health systems to get a diverse population in a bunch of different senses. Part of that is geographic, part of that is demographic. You can see on the right-hand side here a table looking at various key demographics and the comparison between what is in the Dandelion dataset and the US average as a whole. But then also there are other types of diversity that are important as well, different care patterns, different machine types. Having all of that diversity in there and in one place makes it really easy to be able to look at all of the different cuts of the data that you need for evaluating AI algorithms. So, what do we get from those health systems? There's all of the data that we're getting is included. It's all of the EMR data, but it's also the raw data that is needed to as inputs for various AI algorithms in cardiology. So that includes ECG waveforms, it includes echo videos, it includes CTs, MRs, cardiac cath and other procedure reports, et cetera. So we really have the full continuity of the data that's relevant for cardiology. Now, let's talk a little bit about what we are trying to accomplish with the AI assessment lab, both for AI developers and for hospitals. As Kate mentioned, both of these stakeholders are important to the goals that we've set out. And most of the folks on the phone here or on the webinar are AI developers, but I think it's important for us to be transparent about what we're trying to do across both sides of this marketplace. So on the AI developer side, what we're really trying to do is help you increase trust in the performance of your algorithm, and the impact of it through independent analysis, right? It is very easy for developers to say that they have good performance, but having a third-party view of that really helps hospital systems separate the wheat from the chaff. Second, we want to help you demonstrate generalizability across hospitals, geography, machine types, etc. Because this is always going to be one of the key questions that you are asked as you go to market. Third, we want to help you reduce risk by identifying potential issues as early on as possible in the development process. I think anyone who has been through the process of building, validating, and scaling the commercial application of an AI algorithm knows that there are many, many ways to be wrong. And it is good to find out how you're wrong and correct those errors as early as possible in the process. And we think having access to this data can help you do that. Finally, you all probably know very well that the process of going, health system by health system, hospital by hospital, and doing local validation is extremely time and resource intensive. And so we think that by making it easy and fast to be able to get this level of validation done will allow you to focus your resources on the handful of clients that are most interested, and get to the crux of the issue faster. So now let's put on the other hat. Think about this from the hospital perspective. They, of course, are being approached by many AI developers. And for them, it's very valuable to be able to increase transparency and know upfront that this algorithm that you are saying is good and will work at their hospital will, in fact, be good and have a good probability of working at their hospital. That allows them to prioritize their resources and make sure that they're going through to the sort of very cost and intensive process of local validation only for algorithms that already show strong potential and are a good strategic fit for their specific population and for their priorities. Really, so across the board, what we're aiming to do here is decrease transaction costs on both sides of this market and allow the best algorithms to shine. So How exactly are we doing that? We have four products that we are focused on. The first two are the ones that are the focus of today's case studies and the ones that are live today. But we want to give you a sense of what is on deck for the second two as well. So the first product is pre-submission testing. And really the question that we're trying to answer with this is help you, the developer, validate algorithm performance on a multi-site data set to prepare for regulatory submission. And what this allows you to do is essentially onboard the algorithm, run it on our data set, get results, and then do a lot of cuts of the data, decide which populations it works well for, do error analysis, etc. We have already had a couple of clients who have done this with the AHA AI Assessment Lab. We'll be talking to one of them shortly. But we are actively seeking out additional ones to partner with us in the early phases of development as beta customers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Right now, the modalities that we're actively supporting are ECG, echo, and EMR. In the next couple of months, we will then be expanding that to include CT and MR as well. Okay, so that's the pre-submission testing product. The second product then is the formal AI, the performance report, right? This is intended for algorithms that have already been locked. The goal is to get that third-party AHA AI Assessment Lab evaluation of it, show how it works across a variety of different cuts, and use that as a tool that you can then bring to prospective clients to provide third-party evaluation of the algorithm. The third product, impact analysis, then attempts to answer the question, okay, great, the algorithm works. Does it make a difference, right? What is the potential clinical and financial impact that this algorithm could have deployed in a particular way in a clinical workflow? And then the fourth product will be ongoing monitoring to make sure that as we are getting ongoing refreshes of all of the data from those health systems that I showed you earlier, we can repeatedly run that algorithm on an ongoing basis to detect drift. So what I'm going to do now is move on and double click into the first of those products, the first two that we're going to be talking about today. As I said, these are really intended for different phases in the product development lifecycle. Pre-submission testing is really focused on before submission to the FDA or to other regulatory authorities, whereas the performance report is really intended for the tail end of that process as you're about to go into submission or after submission. What is the actual form factor? What is the engagement? Well, for pre-submission testing, really what you get access to is an interactive platform, a data science environment that is Jupyter Notebook based, where you get the outputs of your algorithm run on a particular cohort, along with a variety of different structured variables that allow you to cut the data in different ways and decide very flexibly, iterate on how to define the target population and how to do various types of subgroups, group analysis that you need for your regulatory submission. On the other side, on the performance report, what do you get? Well, here, what you get is you get this third-party AHA branded assessment of algorithm performance and bias. This is sort of less iterative, right? This is a one-time view, which has that third-party blessing with the methodologies that have been developed by our expert advisory panel that Kate showed you, and has that rigorous third-party view to build credibility with hospital decision makers and algorithm users. So let's double click into our first case study, which is on that pre-submission testing product. So let me go into a little bit more detail on how the process works, and then I'll invite Moin to join me so that we can talk about his experience going through this process. So how does this work? We start off, there's a short contract really intended mainly to protect your IP. We do some pre-processing to ensure that the algorithm will work on the data. And then you submit the algorithm in a Docker container. We can either onboard that onto the Dandelion platform, or you can self-host it. The key point here is that neither we nor the AHA ever see your IP. It's yours and it's all protected. We do a sample run, and then after that, we'll deploy the algorithm on a full validation cohort that has been specified with your input. And then, as I said, you get the output of the algorithm run along with a wide variety of structured data fields that you can use to slice and dice the results in various ways, understand how your algorithm is performing, and conduct error analysis where it isn't. And then you can export those results and share that analytical output with regulators or with other stakeholders as you see fit. So, Moin, please join me here, and let's talk a little bit about who you are and who Accucardia is. Let me turn it over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nick. Much appreciated. My name is Moin Husseini. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Accucardia. And Accucardia is an early stage company developing ECG applications for cardiology and beyond. We've gotten 2 breakthrough device designations last year, and we've partnered with Dandelion and AHA to validate our aortic stenosis detection model using ECG. And we're going to use that data, that validation with AHA and Dandelion to prepare for our submission to the FDA for clearance. So a little bit about the algorithm. So what we're proposing to do is enable earlier detection of aortic stenosis, which frequently goes undetected or treated too late. We're hoping to use ECGs gathered from patients in the primary care setting or before they've seen cardiology and screen them for the presence of aortic stenosis and then refer them on for evaluation for therapy. So they would subsequently get sent for echocardiography to get confirmation of their diagnosis. And then hopefully that leads to earlier treatment and better outcomes for those patients. We've done 2 validations at academic medical centers, and then an additional one using a public NIH-funded population health study. And we really sought to get more representative data to support the requests coming from the FDA for our submission. So we've gotten specific guidance around the need for a demographically representative population, a geographically representative population, a variety of site types, and the plan otherwise would have been quite difficult to go to each center or site to construct that cohort manually or one by one. And what this program was able to offer us was essentially a one-stop shop. And so we are in the process right now, and hopefully we'll complete it next week. But we've had an excellent experience so far, particularly validating one of our other algorithms for hyperkalemia as well. So we're looking forward to those results.
Amazing. Thanks, Moin. I'm curious, so like as an AI developer going through this, how did this help you prepare for your FDA submission?
Absolutely. So as I sort of foreshadowed a little bit, the main thing that it really helped us do was twofold. First was to get a representative data set in one stop, rather than going to several different health systems and contracting with them individually. We were able to get the size, the statistically significant sample size, the representativeness, the diversity across demographics, site types, geographies, input devices, et cetera, all of that in one place. And then additionally, in terms of a representative population, we needed to get data outside of the academic medical center environment. We wanted to get data that was representative of other types of health systems or hospital sites, and we were able to do that through this program. And so those are the 2 key things that I would say. But additionally, we had some learnings that we got as a part of the process, and we could talk about that as we follow up on
Yeah.
subsequent.
I mean, yeah, please go ahead there. Like, what did you learn? How did the data look different than the data that you had trained on? And how did that feed into your product development process?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the data platforms that are built at academic medical centers have cleaned up data. So those are they've made it nice for training and validation. And so they've taken out a lot of the say like noisy ECGs. They make sure that all the echo studies have all the necessary parameters in them. They make sure that the data is clean so that you have a solid ground truth. And so that's very helpful. But on the flip side, you're not necessarily, once you train there, you're not necessarily prepared for deploying in an environment where the data may be messier. And so, one of the early learnings that we had was exposure to noisy ECGs or ECGs where the lead was a flat line, or there were missing, we're using a measurement matrix and there were missing parameters in the measurement matrix. So while our initial effort here was to validate the performance of the model, and we weren't validating a final product with all the error checking and error correction, we had an early insight into the types of error correction that we'll need to do once we go to market and deploy it in a more real world context.
Great. Yeah, so I think that is really a key point for this, right? There's this juxtaposition between, on the one hand, you want really nice, clean data in order to be able to train your algorithm, but then once the time comes to get it out into the real world, that very asset can become a liability, right? And so you have to very carefully balance these two things over the course of the product development lifecycle.
Absolutely, it's critical to get to see how your technology operates in the real world setting before you deploy it. And also not only that, but just in terms of the algorithm performance itself, the population at non-academic medical centers can look quite different. And so you want to make sure that your models are performing across the variety of populations that it's intended to be deployed.
Great. Well, I guess last question for you then, how did doing this influence your go-to-market strategy, if at all?
Yeah, so number one, I would say that it's sped up our process because again, we've gone to one data provider and we were able to obtain the sample size and representativeness and diversity in our data set. So that's helped us significantly. Additionally, it's helpful to have a third party validation, independent validation performed to give additional confidence around the results. And that I believe will help provide the FDA the sufficient assurance that they have that the proper testing was done. Additionally, we had learnings above and beyond that from exposure to more real world data. So now as we go forward and build the productized version of our algorithm, we know beforehand the types of noisy ECG filters we need to build. We know how to we know what sort of performance we're targeting and the type of data handling and cleanup we'll need to do as we deploy in real world data context. So we've gotten that additional learning, and we hope and we are hopefully going to get a very solid validation here to support our FDA submission in a more timely fashion.
Amazing. Well, Moin, thank you so much for being an early adopter here, and then also being willing to jump on this webinar with us and share your experiences with others. So stick around. If folks have any questions for Moin, please go ahead and put them in the box, and we'll come back to him later. Moving on then to case study number 2. So now this is shifting gears from that initial iterative process to the performance report, right? This is really intended for after an algorithm is locked and really looking at how it performs across a wide variety of different sites. And what we have here, what you get from this performance report, there are a couple of screenshots here that give you a sense of it, right? We have the overall performance. We have a few different of the standard metrics like AUC, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, et cetera. But then the ability to split that out across a wide range of different variables, demographics, social determinants of health, various machine types and input qualities, the sites, uh, so urban versus rural, small hospitals versus large hospitals, and then also the clinical dimensions as well, various cuts of the population that may yield stronger or weaker results. So the goal here is to be able to provide a one-stop shop that provides lots of different cuts of the data. So in order to make this real, we have partnered with Michael, who can join us now on the call, to use an algorithm that was developed by AHA and sort of eat our own dog food, as it were, and take that algorithm, which has a lot of previous validations, and run it through this process and see what we can learn from it. So, Michael, let me turn the mic over to you to walk through the prevent algorithm and the validation that we did on it.
Thank you, Nick. So this is a little bit of a validation of validation. Right? We went with a known tool, the American Heart Association prevent equation that I had the privilege of contributing to the development. It's a simple algorithm based on regression, right? So it's not the most fancy AI, but that gives us a good sense of what to expect, right? And in terms of metrics, in terms of the algorithm, and then really seeing how the process really works. So the prevent equation, it's the newest iteration in a long line of successful AHA endorsed algorithms that drive guidelines. The previous rendition you might know is called the pooled cohorts equations, used in the 2012-2013 guidelines, and then in the 2018 update, and prevent is the newest. The difference of prevent compared to pooled cohorts has important features, right? So pooled cohorts, the older equation, use data just from NIH cohort studies like the Framingham Heart Study that I used to work for a number of years. Prevent equation used these studies plus data from electronic health records, right? And in fact, the sample size of the curated EHR data was much larger than the cohorts. The results were very consistent. So prevent has a stronger real world sense, and in some early stage validations, we've been seeing that does make a difference. It's age-based, right? So you're predicting not disease from today for 10 years only, but a person age 50, what's their risk of disease by age 60 or 70 or whatever you want to make of it. Looks at outcomes, total CVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, as well as heart failure. And importantly, the decision was made not to include race. It's the first AHA equation in the series that does not include race either as a predictor or a stratifying factor in the equation. So I think where this exercise is very relevant and interesting, prevent will be used in the context of health system data, right? We want to identify patients who are at increased risk of cardiovascular disease for management, either with lipid lowering, blood pressure, and so on and so forth. So that's the background of this activity. So what did we look at, right? So in evaluation of predictive performance, unlike generative AI, this field is very well established, right? And I spent many years of my career working and looking at metrics, performance measures, what matters, and so on and so forth. So what we're doing here, we're looking first at the model-specific metrics. So that's the area under the ROC curve, right? It's a measure of discrimination, how good the model is in differentiating people who end up developing cardiovascular disease from those who do not, right? And the ranges from 0.5 to 1, with larger being better. And in general, all equations in this field over 10-year horizon have performance around the 0.7 range, right? So you see this here, very consistent finding. Then we get into more clinical practice applicability question of this algorithm. So you can quantify risk. You can say, okay, Michael, your risk is 5%. That's kind of on the border, so you might need a statin, may not. But for practical evaluation in a clinical setting, you want to pick a threshold and say, okay, if a person is above a certain threshold, and the AHA has used 7.5 in the previous guidelines, now there is conversation on maybe 5 is more appropriate as a classification threshold, right? If you're above a certain threshold, your risk is sufficiently high to be a candidate of treatment. In this case, could be lipid-lowering statin treatment. If it's low, you monitor your health, but maybe pharmacological treatment is not necessary, right? So we had to pick a threshold for illustration purposes. We chose to pick prevalence or the incidence of disease, right? What is the event rate in the next 10 years? And the reason this threshold is attractive, it has a lot of good mathematical properties for evaluation. It also has very good common sense. If you don't know anything about the person except that they come from a population whose 10-year risk of cardiovascular disease is 4.4%, if I ask you, next person from that population comes, what's your best guess at their 10-year risk? Well, you will say it's 4.4%. So that's the kind of average risk. If your risk factors are worse, high lipids, high blood pressure, your risk will be higher than this number. If they're better, you're healthier, it will be lower. So it's a natural classification threshold, right? If you're above average, you're high risk. If you're below average, you're lower risk, right? Kind of simplistic way of putting it together. So we chose that threshold to present these specific performance metrics. Sensitivity, what percentage of people with disease the algorithm with this threshold will catch. And of course, the numbers are threshold dependent. Specificity of those without disease, how we correctly classify as not having disease, right? Or the reverse of that, 1 minus specificity tells us how many people we alarm unnecessarily. Positive predictive value, telling us what among those who are told that are high risk, what percentage actually develops the disease. And negative predictive value, if we tell you you don't have the disease, what's the probability that you don't, right? So what's the percentage of people that we miss? And so those are the performance characteristics of PREVENT. Again, this is not to say that PREVENT will be used with just that threshold. And then you can look at the ROC plots and other across the threshold summaries. But this one gives us a good sense of what might be expected at this optimal threshold.
Michael, can I just jump in here with a quick clarifying question? So for the developers who are on the line, right, they're going to be coming to us post submission, right? So they'll have a threshold already established, right? So unlike the PREVENT algorithm, which is sort of a risk stratification mechanism, right? They will have an approval that includes a particular performance threshold, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we would then take that, we would plug that in here to the threshold, and they would then see the performance results coming from that approved threshold.
That is absolutely correct. If the approved threshold can be established, right? And there are caveats with that, right? Yes. So I will say for every developer on the line, I will say in your submission, use this threshold too, right? I'm not saying it's your only one, but this one is very solid, right? You can defend it to the FDA. I can go with you to the FDA and help defend it because of the science behind this threshold. But beyond that, right, there will be different thresholds. And the challenge becomes when the population performance changes, right, you go to a site, you validate, you have a threshold, you have a sense of what's going on, and you go to a different site, right, which is very rural or very different racial ethnic mix or something else, and the threshold does not apply, you might see results that are fairly strange, right? And then you don't have to be alarmed because it may not be a function of your algorithm not performing. It might be just an issue of a threshold selection.
Exactly. And those cuts, right? We're not going to go into great detail on this webinar, but once you take these high level numbers and then you start cutting them by the various variables, that's where some of those interesting insights come out.
Right, exactly.
Perfect.
And I think the other thing I would add, Nick, with the database that you amassed, right, which is nicely geographically representative, I think the added value, if I'm looking from a developer's perspective, you can play with that data and look at different thresholds, right? Look at the different sites and see what you're getting. So I think that is that is broadly beneficial for all those who want to market their product beyond a single or a local health system.
Exactly. Great. Anything else on this, or shall we move on, Mike?
No, we can move on. The next slide, I think I like this, kind of shows the context, right? How does prevent equation perform in this data, HA Dandelion Validation Lab, versus the validations that we published that on the data that was available to us developing the prevent equation, right? And what you see, it's the numbers are fairly consistent, slightly higher performance in what we've had, to be expected, right? We validate on the data we have access to that we're kind of using to develop. We're splitting and partitioning. But I will say the assessment lab is the real world value performance here. And I will say I'm generally, as developer of Prevent, I'm happy, right? The performance stays in the reasonable range. Like you can ask me, well, when would you get worried, right? If it went down to the 0.6 range, I would say, okay, what is going on? Because in general, the algorithm will become a little bit worse on a completely separate data, but it should be flexible enough not to deteriorate a lot, right? And that's again the advice to all the developers on the call. I remember doing a study many years ago when people put a bunch of genetic variables and came to me and said, Michael, we found the best algorithm ever for prediction of diabetes, right? AUC of 0.97, we have it figured out. I said, show it to me. Well, they overfit the model in their development sample. And I said, can you validate it externally? And then it went down to 0.7 or below, right? And then the bubble burst, right? So that's why validations are so important.
Indeed. And I think this is a good, preliminary demonstration that, the general trend observes, which is that is observed, right? Which is that you take the algorithm to a new data set, you see a slight decline in performance, but that generally it's in the same ballpark, and that this is a pretty representative data set that then can be used to extrapolate from there.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah, and so this is getting into calibration and performance across subgroups. So I call this the Obermeyer plot. Ziad Obermeyer, a good colleague of mine and co-founder of Dandelion, right, published this super impactful paper in 2019 looking at racial bias of a popularly used algorithm and created a curve. Like it's a must read. I think everybody I know read the paper, and has the figure which basically shows in Ziad's paper by race what is the predicted risk according to the algorithm and what are the observed event rates, right? And in Ziad's paper in the plot, there is a big discrepancy where for one racial group, for Black Americans, the observed risk is much higher than the predicted decile based on the algorithm, right? And that is a problem. We've done this here as illustration for rural versus urban population, and you see that the curves are pretty much staying together across the range. That's a very good sign for Prevent, right? That's what I like to see. And again, nice subcategorization of the social determinant that Dandelion database has. We're able to look at performance and see that nothing strange is happening. Again, for you as a developer, that gives you comfort, right? If you're going to say market your product to a rural site, you probably won't be expecting something bad happening if the plots look like the ones presented here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Michael. And so if you do this with AHA and Dandelion, you'll get a report that includes a number of these different plots that break it down by different variables, which then allows you to go to health systems that have, rural health systems, for example, and be able to make that comparison, various demographics, various machine types, and be able to show that overall your algorithm is well calibrated. Is that the same thing as a full local validation? No, of course not. But the goal is to be able to say, get through those first 2, 3 conversations with something that is rigorous and directionally accurate, and be able to conserve your resources and the hospital's resources for only like that last mile of final validation.
Exactly. You need to show something to get in the conversation with skeptical and resource-strapped health systems, right? And then you won't be able to show them performance on their data until you run the study. But the first conversation with objective evaluation on not the data that you had to develop it, but completely independent, like in the example of Prevent, I think brings a lot of value for these initial conversations.
Great. Well, I guess, Michael, sort of with wrap up on the conversation, yeah, just a few words. What do you see as being like the learnings and the benefits from the exercise that we went through together, revalidating the Prevent equations?
Right. So I think the benefits, as I said, the independent validation, the transparency and credibility is very valuable. As you said, Nick, it's not enough. It doesn't replace what Nigam Shah and I call recurrent local validation. That has to happen. But if like we at Duke are bombarded for algorithm developers, right, wanting theirs to be tested, and there is we have to prioritize which ones to consider, and most of them have some validation performance assessment, but it's usually on local data to whom the developer had access, right? In most extreme cases, it's even only on synthetic data, right? So it does not have this objective assessment on a large, fairly representative sample, which I will say, while not sufficient, is absolutely necessary for me to develop basic credibility of what I will be seeing. Right, the real world, this is real data, right? What I like about Dandelion's database, it's not it's not cohort or kind of curated, nicely created data. It's real, right? It comes from real patients, a real setting. And the transaction cost, the last part, right? Really important is work in development that actually myself and my Duke colleague are working with the American Heart Association on the question of what are the associated costs that the algorithm can help reduce, right? So that's another component that will be informative.
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you so much for walking us through this and for sharing your experiences with the rest of the group. Let's move on towards wrapping up, and then hopefully we can retain some time for any questions that people may have. So as we've said throughout the call, we're sort of in this beta phase of rolling this product out. We really believe that the way to build a good product is to build it with others, build it with the ecosystem. And so, as you can see, we are live. We have been working with clients, but we're now sort of expanding the circle to include others, the folks that we invited to this conversation. We would love to find a few more beta customers that we can work with over the course of the next few months before a full launch of this product in the fall. And so I think that the benefits of partnering with us on this are, first of all, discounted pricing. Second, have the opportunity to iterate with us and provide direct input onto the product development. We're actively engaging both with developers like you, but then also with health system executives across the country to understand what they need in order to be able to evaluate algorithms, and really trying to make sure that we are meeting the needs of both of those stakeholders as efficiently as possible. We will be sort of formally launching this product to everyone in the world at Health in Las Vegas in October. And so part of what we are also looking to do is find a few more case studies that we can feature at that session. So if you are interested, please reach out to Kate. Her email is on the screen, and we will all work together to have a conversation and see if it would be a good fit. So Kate, back to you to facilitate any Q&A.
Thanks. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One being for Moin, in your view as an AI developer, was it easy to onboard the algorithm? And do you feel like your IP was truly protected?
Yes, I would say that we had a very straightforward process to load our algorithm in the Dandelion environment in a Docker container. We felt that we were provided the proper assurances that our IP was protected, and we worked closely with the team to make sure that sufficient cybersecurity enhancements or protections were there to protect our IP from outside intruders. And so the process there was quite smooth.
So it looks like we do have a wide range of organizations participating today. Nick, could you tell us if there are algorithms that are best suited for the lab, or more importantly, algorithms that shouldn't be part of it?
Yeah, so as I said on one of the slides, right now, for the next several months, we are focused on ECG algorithms like Accucardia's, on echo algorithms, and then on EMR-only algorithms. There are a lot of good cardiology and stroke-related algorithms in CT and MR. We will be getting to those, but we're still a couple of months away from that. So we'd be delighted to start that conversation. Just want to be transparent with everyone that there's still just like some technical build that we need to be able to do in order to be able to support those at scale. And that's a couple of months away. And then I think the other thing that is sort of an extra like added benefit that we've invested a lot of time and energy in is sort of very like longitudinally based algorithms, right? I think Prevent is a good example of that, right? Because we have the longitudinal data from these health systems. Those health systems have been very carefully selected for the longitudinality of the data. That's a really good fit.
Another question for you all, more of a think question. So many ECGs have done in the community setting are not digital. How are folks thinking through this from an equity and technical perspective?
Moin, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Was that directed at any one of us, Kate?
No.
So for our algorithms, we do require digitized ECGs, and so that's been a requirement for us. Going forward, we may look at developing tools. We actually have a tool that can take a PDF or of a strip and convert it to a digitized ECG, but there's potential for loss of information in that whole process, and so our initial effort here is to validate on digital ECGs and then to look at how we might expand that. That said, hospitals are increasingly storing their ECGs in digitized format, and that is becoming more and more accessible. So at some point, there should be a convergence we see over time. But great point. Some setting, particularly in developing countries, for instance, we've seen the need for solutions that read like PDF strips, for instance.
This is kind of going back to the earlier question for you, Nick. Are we only interested in validating heart-related algorithms?
Yes. So the scope for the AHA AI assessment lab is focused on heart and stroke. So there's sort of like, a long laundry list of relevant conditions within that. But yes, that is the focus of this collaboration.
For both Michael, Moyne, and Nick, can you speak to really the time frame for running the assessment lab?
Moyne, how long did it take?
So it varies depending on the complexity of what you're trying to do, but loading your algorithm into the environment and initiating a run, I think that's a process that can take no more than 2 weeks. All the agreements are done and in place. The actual work of loading the algorithm, getting access to the data, doing the test run, presuming that you've already defined your cohort ahead of time, that does not take a super large amount of time. I would say the biggest part is making sure that you're prepared ahead of that to define your cohort correctly, to make sure that you are exactly targeting the types of patients that your intended use is for, and that's particularly critical for pre-submission applications where your labeling is still up in the air and you're trying to figure out what you're going after. Would probably be an easier process for post-clearance devices.
Yeah, and I guess just to build off that, Moyne, we have sort of an onboarding checklist that tries to take all of the learnings that we've had dealing with various developers to try to front load a lot of that decision making and making sure that we're taking a lot of the sort of implicit choices and make them explicit so that we can, avoid a lot of iteration on that cohort. But yeah, it does take some time there. I think what we're really aiming for on a lot of this is, an end-to-end process in the sort of 6 to 8 week time range. But obviously there are details.
While we're on the topic of time, how much development time do you estimate the assessment lab has saved you in compared to partnering with individual hospitals?
That's a great question. So if we were to try and assemble the same cohort, we would have to go to 3 different health systems, negotiate data access agreements with those separate health systems, make sure that they were all complementary in terms of the diversity of data that they were providing, and then account for the idiosyncrasies of how that data was stored in each of those environments. And so that would it's hard for me to say how long that would possibly take, but it would certainly take a lot longer than what we've experienced thus far. So just having that one-stop shop approach is extremely helpful, particularly given the specific guidance that we've gotten under from the FDA around CFR 870-2380. You have specific requirements around geography, demographics, hospital site type, devices that are being used. So if you look to assemble all of that, the timeline could take well over a year, whereas here you could do the validation in under that.
Michael, do you have any, like, I know that, doing an academic paper is a bit of a different beast, but do you have any sort of like rough heuristic that you could provide in terms of how long it took you to assemble the data for that other validation you did on Prevent relative to this?
Well, so we assembled the data kind of once, right, and then subdivided it. But assembling the data that takes time, right? We're talking months to make it available. And what I would add, which is really important from a health systems perspective, right? So we at Duke have the ABCDS, algorithm-based clinical decision support governance, right? So every algorithm has to go through a review before it can be put in production, but even before kind of prioritizing and starting a conversation. So as I said earlier, having it validated on a completely independent data with the AHA's kind of stamp of credibility, I think makes a big difference from my perspective.
A question about manufacturers. So are the algorithms specific to the ECG manufacturer? And if yes, what is the process to ensure the validation is applicable to all ECG machine types?
Right, that's a great question. So I think it's possible to say train on one particular machine type, but you can't claim to demonstrate compatibility or interoperability with other machine types until you validated there. And so, so that was an important part of our collaboration with AHA and Dandelion Health, was getting access to other machine types, so our label would be broader than just interoperability with one specific machine type. So that was really, really important to us. And so I think it's just primarily a matter of doing that validation across the variety of machine types available. If you don't do that, then your labeling is likely to be limited to a specific machine type, and we have seen that in the deployment of some algorithms, and that can be quite limiting to your commercial opportunity.
Last question. And I know, Nick, you talked about the 4 different products and services that we're offering here, but could you speak largely to the pricing structure that the validation services are going to offer?
Yeah, so really what we're aiming for here is sort of for each of these products, a sort of a simple fixed fee for access to the data and for the services associated with it. I think the one important asterisk associated with that is when it comes to algorithms that require sort of like multiple specialists ground truthing, right? If the data is available in the EMR and that is the ground truth, for example, Moyen was talking about the hyperkalemia algorithm, right? Like the ground truth is right there, in the labs, right? And that's relatively straightforward. For other algorithms that are looking at sort of measurements and you need to compare them against that, that can be an additional cost to get that ground truthing done by experts. But in general, the goal is to have simple, straightforward pricing for each of these individual products.
Great, thanks. Well, we're about right at time. Want to thank everybody, all of our speakers, presenters. Thank you so much for your time and dedication today. Already getting feedback that this has been really helpful and insightful. We are recording today's discussion, so we'll be sending this back out to everyone who's participated today. And please feel free to share with others who might come along as early adopters of the assessment lab.